Welcome to Georgina's That's My Story. Today we're fortunate enough to have a wonderful young woman who's a local pharmacist or works in Georgina, Patty Ibrahim, and she's going to be telling us a little bit about her story. Welcome, Patty.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me to be on the show with you.
Well, you are such an energetic, lively woman who really is impressive. I've heard Patty speak to groups, and we'll talk about that a little later.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about your background, Patty. You're a pharmacist?
Yes. So I'm a pharmacist that trained in Toronto in U of T, graduated in 2009, and I graduated to come out and explore where I fit in the pharmacy world. So I did different odd jobs, and then I really got into psychiatric pharmacy.
Psychiatric pharmacy.
Yes.
So would you explain a little bit about what that is?
Sure. So for a period of time, I worked at a psychiatric facility in Durham, and it was a chance to support doctors in making decisions for psychiatric patients in terms of best treatments, evidence-based approaches.
Right.
So I was there for a couple of years, and I studied to get my board certification in psychiatric pharmacy from the Board of Pharmacy Specialties, which is an American organization that is internationally recognized for those specialties. And it allows me to help patients and doctors kind of navigate challenging situations when it comes to treatment, and because often we deal with like complex cases, and
yes.
So so it allows me to have a very broad perspective and in-depth perspective in terms of treatment different psychiatric illnesses.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
You also work with some geriatric patients.
Right, yes. So prior to going into the world of psychiatric pharmacy, I did study for the geriatrics specialty. I remember we in the class of 2009 at U of T, they kept telling us, the baby boomers will the highest number of baby boomers will turn in 2011.
Right.
So I was like, it'd be really good to have that skill set. So I did also get a board specialty in geriatric pharmacy to start, and that opened the door to allow me to be recruited into this psychiatric facility that needed someone with both skills, because a lot of our patients, as they get older, they do have challenges with things like Parkinson's, and there are patients who have psychiatric disorders with that condition as well.
Right.
So it was a good skill to have.
Absolutely. And with our aging population, that's absolutely needed for sure.
Right.
For sure.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about your actual experience with some of the challenges of working, say, with seniors.
So I think it's the care for seniors needs to be very meticulous, because there's so many things that you need to be aware of. You need to be
Lots
aware
of variables.
A lot of variables. You need to be aware of their history, medical or psychiatric history. You need to also be aware of, especially when it comes to seniors and dealing with family, is what are their values. Mm-hmm. So the thing about evidence care medicine is that it's the foundation of it is that it's not just the treatment that is proven to be the best treatment based on like clinical trials, but it is how do you select the best treatment based on patient values.
Right.
So oftentimes when you're dealing with the geriatric population, there's a lot of emotions involved. There's kids and families and a lot of concerned caregivers, right?
Right.
So learning how to navigate relationships as you care for patients is really important.
That has to be challenging, because even intergenerational differences, right?
Right, in perspective, exactly. So you'll find the older generation is quite traditional, and they ask, what does a doctor think is best? The younger generation is questioning a lot of the decisions, and they're doing their own research. So you have to cater to every to every kind of dimension of that interaction, right?
That has to be especially challenging when there are different opinions, like the seniors and their children or grandchildren
Exactly.
are from different
But
worlds.
you know, it's part of life, and I think the most important thing as a healthcare professional, we need to figure out how to communicate.
Yes.
And we need to figure out how to have the dialogue, because if we give recommendations and we don't listen enough, or we don't incorporate the family values or the patient values, we will get resistance, and we will make the treatment process more challenging than it needs to be.
Yes, it's
and it
not
doesn't
gonna-
need to be that way.
No, well, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the whole idea of the family probably feels more comfortable if they know you're listening.
Right, right. And also the family has a lot of value to add, because the best way to avoid challenges and problematic treatments and, like, let's say side effects or things that come up, is that when you do enough information gathering, when you ask enough information about the person's history,
Right.
sometimes as patients age, their memory is not great. They don't remember the details, but you know, the daughter remembers, oh no, he once tried this and this happened and this wasn't very good.
Well, that's good, yes.
Right? So you do want as many people to be engaged, and you want the patient to be supported, because if we just take information from the patient only and they are, let's say,
Confused, maybe?
they're confused, there's cognitive impairment at this point, or there's just anxiety that's getting in the way of the conversation.
Right.
You're really limiting the amount of information you can get, and the precision of the treatment selection is not as high.
That's phenomenal that you take that into consideration.
Yeah.
Do you think all pharmacists do? And I guess, well, you've had the special training, so you're very aware.
Yeah, but I do think pharmacists are really good at understanding their patients. I do
Right.
think that they have a lot of even like casual conversations. So my first introduction to Georgina was because I came up to help and support my sister and her husband, who own a pharmacy in Sutton. So Sutton Apothecary is their pharmacy. So
Right.
it's Michael and Lillian. And Michael asked me to come up and help, and so did Lillian at some point. And it was the first, I've been in hospitals for a while, so I've been worked in community, and then I came and you know, Sutton is all about people coming in and you know, asking for advice and telling you their stories and talking about the aging grandparent or the challenges of the adolescent son, right? So it's a great place for conversation with your pharmacist. So I find that the pharmacists have a lot more to offer the system.
Yes.
And they're maybe sometimes underutilized. Like, you know, if a clinician were to call the community pharmacy, they would probably learn a lot about the patient.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, I remember years ago when our third child was ill with an infection,
Yeah.
ear infection,
Right.
and the pediatrician was very reliant on the pharmacist as
Right.
far as you're the experts when it comes to the drugs and what works and what doesn't work. They
Right.
were finding that nothing was helping her. So
Right.
I think that's really wonderful that there's that respect there, which is well deserved because you're the experts on the medication aspect of it for sure. And you now are, the Ontario government is beginning to realize that you're an untapped resource. So,
Yes.
so pharmacists are now enabled to do more as far
Right.
as one-on-one with patients.
Right. So now I think the pandemic really exposed some of the healthcare gaps.
Yes.
And the government realized that they've been holding maybe a little bit back in terms of the scope of pharmacy and what they can do.
Right.
So during the pandemic, pharmacists really, you know, did an amazing job in helping with vaccination and public education. And then they introduced the minor ailments prescribing, which is prescribing for some of the everyday things that often you go to the doctor to, the things that sometimes, you know, if you, with the proper questioning,
Yes.
questions by a clinician, you can get assessed and and given a prescription for in the pharmacy. You
Right.
might not need to see your doctor.
So can you give us an example?
Sure. So some of the examples include things like eye infections,
Right.
or urinary tract infections,
Yes.
UTIs. Some people have, allergic rhinitis, which is basically just having the sniffles from allergies and runny nose. There's sometimes people have skin conditions or type of contact dermatitis, which is a type of skin irritation that if we ask the right questions, we can figure out what to prescribe for you to use. So you'll find that I think the government is trying to save the resources, use the resources properly, and allow the doctors to sit with more complex patients that need blood work and they need to look at their MRI imaging and other things, and allow patients who are having conditions that can easily be addressed in 7 or 10 days of like antibiotics and things like that at the pharmacy.
So is there an uptick? Are there more people actually coming in for that now, or are they even aware? I think some patients might not be aware.
Right, some patients might not be aware. I think the awareness is increasing, but it all depends on your accessibility to your doctor.
Yes.
So if you are, and it all depends on how people manage. Some people, they just go pick up anything from over the counter in the pharmacy. They don't ask, they just test things. They don't have time, and they don't really think about talking to their pharmacist. Other people are already going to the doctor, so they'll ask him about this as well.
Right.
And some people are it only lasts for 7 days. I won't take treatment because I'm uncomfortable with medication, right? So you have different attitudes, right?
Right.
So we've seen some uptake, but I think it's going to take a while to tell people and let people know.
It never dawned on me to actually ask the pharmacist about over-the-counter medication that's being sold in the same facility.
Right.
But it makes sense, right?
Yes. So there's a huge part of our training in pharmacy is that we learn about non-pharmacological treatments, meaning treatments that are not drug specific. So we actually learn about methods of managing certain ailments without medications, and we learn about the use of medication prescribed and non-prescribed. So there is a lot of training that goes into what medications over the counter without prescription can be utilized for certain conditions in the best way.
That's right. I mean, I think a lot of us are totally unaware of that, and that's not using you to the best of our ability, right?
Right. But you know what? I do think as patients walk into the pharmacy and have a rapport with their pharmacist, they do build a lot of trust, and it comes naturally to them when they pick up something to say, hey, like, does this interfere with my medication? I always pick this from the other pharmacy.
Good.
What do you think about this? So, yeah.
Well, that's fascinating. We're going to continue our conversation after a short break, and we'll find out more about what's in the future for you and for pharmacy. Thank you, Patty.
Great. Thank you, Jane.
Welcome back. Today we're speaking with a wonderful young pharmacist who works here locally in Sutton, and her name is Patty Ibrahim. And thank you, Patty, for coming in. It's been very informative. I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about your professional journey and what got you interested in the psychiatric aspect of pharmacy.
Sure. So I think I fell into it. I mean, as sometimes you graduate and you have an idea of what a profession is, but you don't know until you get your feet wet.
Right.
And I think with me, when I chose pharmacy, I thought it would be a good place to. I loved chemistry and I loved applied sciences, and I thought it would be a good place to be in the healthcare system, but also to have opportunities to work in different sectors, whether it's hospital or community, or even industry. So it was the variety that I thought had a lot of opportunity, and also I loved working with patients, so I wanted the one-on-one.
You're a people person.
Kind of, yeah. I wanted the one-on-one. And when I graduated, I began in community, working for different pharmacies, and I got exposed to initially working in an addiction clinic downtown.
Wow.
And that was a whole new world.
An eye-opener, I'm sure.
It is an eye-opener. I do think that, you have to be exposed to certain things in order to let go of your prejudice and to understand the human experience.
Right.
And that was an interesting time for me. I learned a lot from there, and then I began to work with a community pharmacy that catered to psychiatric homes. So when I say that there are pharmacies out there that provide that partner up with homes and they provide their medications. And there was a pharmacy in Whitby at the time that did that service. And it allowed me to kind of get close and see what care for those type of patients are like, and how we have to be very meticulous. And when you have a patient who can't, sometimes they're not well enough to make the decisions. They have what we call this shared decision makers and people that do things on their behalf. You feel very responsible in terms of taking care of their medications. And
these are people with power of attorney, perhaps?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. So yeah, I started there, and that made me aware of opportunities in hospital for psychiatric patients. And I applied. I mentioned I got my geriatric certification first, and that opened the door for me to go into that hospital. And when I went into that hospital in Whitby, I began to work with adolescents. People who are first episode psychosis. What an experience to see that, and to see like how can we have the right conversation with the patients early enough so that they are on board with treatment, so that there aren't a lot of interruptions in treatment and the condition doesn't get worse, right? So you do really want to win the patient over, but you want to inform the patient so they don't feel like they are, they're losing control in all aspects.
They don't want to be bullied.
Yes, yeah. So I was there for a couple of years, worked with adolescents, worked with geriatrics, worked with adults who had recurrent severe schizophrenia, bipolar.
That's such a challenging, oh my goodness.
Yeah, obsessive compulsive disorders, things of the like. And then I had a really great opportunity to work with a psychiatrist who came into the hospital wanting to open the first residential eating disorder program at the hospital. So we don't have a residential eating disorder program in Canada.
Really?
We don't. The States does. But this, at least not publicly funded. I don't know if we have private, but for sure not publicly funded. And this was the first attempt.
And it's such a big area.
It is a big area, especially now with social media, yeah.
Yes.
So there was psychiatrists that came to the hospital I was in, and they wanted to open this department. And my manager of the pharmacy department at the time was like, I don't really know who can take on this department. Like, no one, we don't have training in eating disorder.
Right.
But we have to kind of learn as we go along. So I kind of, I went in there and I said, can I give it a try?
You were attracted to
Yes, I'm like, can I give it a try? Like, I know it's not like, geriatrics, you learn about organ function and deterioration over time because of aging, but I find that the eating disorder, there's deterioration due to malnutrition. So I'm like, there could be some similarities. Let me see if I can
making different connections. Good.
Yes. So we worked together for a while. She was probably there for 3 years, and it was a great opportunity to learn things about like pharmacogenetics and how DNA can be used for treatment selection, and a lot of interesting new science was being explored in that unit.
I've only heard of DNA being used with immunotherapy with cancer.
Yes. So that's.
But it's a huge.
It's a huge field,
I guess, yeah.
But the fastest moving innovation is oncology, which is cancer.
Right.
Because it's life-saving.
Right.
There's other areas where it's not being used as much yet, but it has so much potential.
I'd never heard of that before. That's fabulous.
Right. So I'm currently working on a certification to complete a pharmacogenetic certification as well.
Another certification.
I think it is the future of medicine. But so that was happening. And so when I was working with adolescents, I really thought about, I need to get better people skills. I need to get better ways, knowing how to talk to patients about things. So I looked into a certificate in applied positive psychology and resilience training. And applied positive psychology is the science of human flourishing. So you learn things like about how to you learn things about positive affect and positive emotions, about relationships, meaning, achievement, vitality, different domains of life, and what you can do to enhance those domains.
Fabulous. Everybody would want that.
Exactly. So there's some skills about like how conflict resolutions, and there's some skills about how to provide a constructive response versus a critical response or a destructive response.
Right.
So that was all great because you're working with adolescents, and often adolescents come in, they're stubborn and they're frustrated, but also eating disorders, they're more rigid. So you can have like a 14-year-old who's rigid about the information you give them, like an 8-year-old.
Really?
So it can be very challenging. So how do you engage with that?
Win them over, yeah.
Right. So it was a very good experience for me. And I moved on. I did this for a while, and then I moved on from the hospital, and I moved into a different sector, which was specialty pharmacy, where you work with patients who have immunotherapies, oncology treatments. And I was recruited in an organization that wanted me to also do resilience training for the national pharmacy team at the time, because it was right in the middle of the pandemic.
The pandemic changed everything,
The
didn't
pandemic was rough.
Yes.
It was rough. So there I was, masked, meeting new people, trying to create new relationships in a new place and do online virtual training.
And there's no way they can see your smile, wouldn't you?
So I have to go like this.
Your eyes are the only way.
I had to go like this. So it was a bit of a challenge, and some of them would have black screens, and I would be like, guys, getting lonely. Someone put on their camera.
Yeah, I want to see you.
Right. So, but it was very rewarding.
Good.
So I found that like learning positive psychology and resilience complemented my mental health education. So it was
Right.
mental health and wellness.
Right.
And I felt like it humanized the experience.
Yes.
Right?
For sure.
I think we come to the point we talk about the treatment so much, we forget, what do people want? What do people need?
Right.
Sometimes they need the comfort and they need the patience when you talk to them, and they need to know that there's not just drug options, but there's like strategies and
Right.
things about the way you think. And so part of like resilience training, you talk about, we do like a simple form of CBT, which is cognitive behavioral treatment, but it's not like, this is not, I'm not a psychotherapist, I'm not trained in psychology.
Right.
Positive psychology is completely different, and it doesn't have to do with mental illness, it has to do with promoting mental wellness.
Right.
But it allows you to analyze your thoughts and figure out what is the root cause of my thinking pattern. So we can actually talk to people about things like that.
Well, I know you've come in to speak to a hospice. I'm a volunteer at hospice, and Patty has come in several times to speak on very practical things in terms of medication, but also attitudes, and the group loves you.
Oh, that's
You're
sweet.
very
Yeah.
empathetic. They feel relaxed.
They're
and
a great group.
They're wonderful.
It always interrupts me.
That's right. There's no question about, am I allowed to ask a question? They're very assertive, aren't they?
Right. I think it was a great idea. Actually, like Michael approached me.
This is your brother-in-law.
Yeah. Michael approached me and he said, look, we've been in the area for a long time. Georgina Hospital is a great location and organization, and I'd love for us to do something, supported by an apothecary at the center. And I said, I'd love to. I miss talking with groups of people in a in a casual way, and getting to hear people's opinions and like just a discussion.
Yes.
And
a lot of these people have gone through a lot of treatment. Many of them are just recuperating from all of the cancer treatments and losses. So they will ask all kinds of questions, of course, from their own experience. But your volunteering to do that is phenomenal. Because you're a treasure. You truly are a treasure.
I mean, like, it has been supported by Michael's Pharmacy to some extent, and I'm really happy he could do that for us.
Well, we're blessed as a community to have you there.
Yeah, I'm actually really grateful to have known the group, and I've met people there who were very who were very like supportive of a lot of the things that I hopefully I will be doing in the future. Yeah.
And one of the things you mentioned at one of the talks that you gave was that the pharmacy is allowed under the government to book an appointment for patients who have many medications to actually sit and talk with you one-on-one as an appointment.
Right. So there is.
How does that work?
So the government has been funding this for years, but I don't think people are aware of it.
Nobody knows about it.
Because when I came to the center and I mentioned it, people were like, we didn't know this. And I was really surprised.
Yes.
Because I think the most benefit would come for someone who has 3 or more chronic medications, and
Right.
most seniors do.
Exactly.
So what it is once a year the government funds an in-depth review of your medications with your pharmacist.
Right.
And it's a chance for for you to ask pharmacists questions. They ask you about how you're taking their medications, what's working, what isn't. You'll find the pharmacist is very good at prompting with the right questions because they
Good.
understand what the medication is meant to do and what side effects are very common for that demographic or that group or that
Right.
age, right?
Right.
So sometimes you uncover things. Like patients sometimes, say, I keep having these stomach issues, I don't know what to do. They go to the doctor and they give them a medication for, let's say, heartburn or acid reflux. But then, you sit with the pharmacist and they're like, oh, well, yeah, you're having stomach problems because you're taking medications that slow down stomach emptying.
Okay.
And that makes the heartburn worse.
Right.
So the question is, are these medications necessary?
So how
Right.
would people that are viewers, if they are in this situation where they're taking more than 3 medications on a regular basis,
Sure.
do they just phone their own pharmacist, or how does it work?
Yeah, so you call your pharmacist and you say, I'm interested in doing an in-depth review of my medications.
Right.
I believe I can do at least one a year. Do I qualify?
Right.
And the pharmacist can tell you, and they can sit with you. And there's ones for diabetic patients specifically as well.
Wow.
Because they're such high-risk patients.
Sure.
You're also entitled to do a review when you leave the hospital
Okay.
within 2 weeks of leaving the hospital, because oftentimes people go into the hospital, a lot of things change, they get overwhelmed. Let's say you're a patient who had no issues, had a heart attack.
Okay, I'm sorry, we're at the end of our
Ooh.
talk. Thank you so much. You've
No
given
problem.
us so much new information,
My
and we
pleasure.
really appreciate
My
all that
pleasure.
you do in our community.
Thank you for having
Thank you
me.
so much, Patty.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Georgina. We'll see you later. Can you believe